I was 26 years old, living alone in a small, unassuming house in a normal neighborhood. Halloween had always been a low-key affair for me. I enjoyed handing out candy to kids until around 7 or 8 p.m., and then I would curl up on the couch with a horror movie. This particular Halloween started like any other. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow that hinted at the night to come. Kids began arriving around 3, their laughter echoing through the streets. Their costumes bright and cheerful. I relished the chaos, watching their excitement as they filled their bags with sweets. By 7, the flow of trick-or-treaters had slowed to a trickle. I decided it was time to indulge in one of my favorite traditions, watching a horror movie marathon. I set the bowl of candy down on the coffee table and sank into the couch, searching for a good flick. As I flipped through the channels, a sudden knock interrupted my search. I set the remote down and went to answer the door. When I opened it, I was taken aback. There stood a middle-aged man in regular clothes, no children in sight. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice laced with confusion. The man's eyes flicked to the inside of my house, searching for something. "Is Aaron here?" he asked quietly. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Who is Aaron?" I replied, my voice steady but my heart racing. He didn't respond but continued to peer inside, his gaze unnerving. I tried again, my instincts screaming at me to close the door. "Who is Aaron?" Finally, he looked back up at me, the emotionless expression on his face sending a wave of discomfort through me. "Aaron is my son. He's out trick-or-treating, but he's lost." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the sidewalk. I stood frozen in place, puzzled and uneasy. Something felt off about the encounter, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I retrieved my phone and called the police, reporting the strange man and the possible missing child. I provided all the details I could, hoping they would take it seriously. After hanging up, I felt a strange compulsion to check the door again. I peered outside, but the night was quiet, the street empty. I turned back to the couch and settled in for the movie, trying to push the encounter from my mind. As the film played on, I became engrossed in the story. But, as I watched, the atmosphere in the house shifted. By the end of the movie, it was nearly 11 o'clock. The house was still and dark, the occasional rustle outside breaking the silence. I stood to grab the candy bowl, but was suddenly struck by the sight of a figure outside the window. My heart raced as I turned to look, but by the time I shifted my focus, the figure was gone. I approached the window, my pulse quickening. I peered through the glass, scanning the darkness outside, but there was no sign of anyone. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the window, sending a shock of fear coursing through me. I whipped around, my eyes widening in terror as I saw the figure standing there, looking in at me. I jumped back, heart pounding as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. I retreated to the hallway, peeking through the peephole, but the figure had vanished again. "Hello, what is your emergency?" The operator's voice crackled through the line. "There's someone outside my house. They keep appearing at my windows," I stammered, panic rising in my voice. "Stay calm. Help is on the way." "Do you know who it is?" she asked. "I don't know, I'm scared." Just then, the front door rattled violently. I barely suppressed a scream, racing down the hallway toward the back door, hoping to escape the chaos. I pushed through the kitchen door, bolting toward the back fence. As I glanced back at the house, I could see the figure moving through the darkened windows, searching for me. Panic surged, propelling me over the fence and into the neighbor's yard. I dashed around the side of their house, my heart pounding in my chest. In my frantic escape, I stumbled and fell into the bushes, scraping my hands and knees. I lay there breathless, praying that the figure wouldn't find me. But just then I heard the faint sound of laughter, followed by the jingle of bells. Confusion flooded my mind as I peeked through the leaves, trying to get a better look. To my shock, I saw children trick-or-treating on the other side of the street, giggling and filling their bags with candy. The figure moved among them, and as I squinted in disbelief, I realized it was the man from earlier, his demeanor calm and collected. The laughter of children contrasted starkly with my fear, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The reality of the situation began to set in. The man was not who he claimed to be. He wasn't looking for a lost child. He had been watching me. The realization sent chills down my spine as I quietly crawled back toward my house. I could see the police lights flashing in the distance, and my heart raced with hope. I dashed back to my front yard just as the police pulled up. Relief washed over me as I waved my arms frantically, trying to get their attention. "Over here!" I shouted, voice hoarse. The officers rushed toward me, their expression serious. I quickly explained everything that had happened. They listened intently, reassuring me that they would investigate. After searching the area, they informed me that the man had left. They advised me to stay vigilant and to lock all doors and windows. In the days that followed, the encounter replayed in my mind. I felt paranoid, jumping at every noise, unsure if I would be safe again. The comfort of my home felt tainted, the warmth replaced by lingering fear. As Halloween approached the following year, I chose to stay indoors. I didn't want to risk facing that man again. But as I sat alone in the dark, I could still hear the faint laughter of children echoing through the streets, a haunting reminder of that Halloween night. I've always been fascinated by shadows, the way they move and shift in the light. But in 2021, this fascination turned into a fear that would haunt me for years. It all began on a chilly autumn evening. I was home alone, curled up on the couch with a book, when I noticed a flicker of movement outside the window. I glanced up, my heart quickening as I saw a shadow pass by, darting across the lawn. I brushed it off as a trick of the light or my imagination playing tricks on me. Yet, as the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. The following evening, I invited some friends over for a horror movie night. We settled in, popcorn ready, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. As the movie unfolded, I caught glimpses of movement outside the window again. I glanced over, but every time I looked, there was nothing. My friends noticed my distraction, and I tried to laugh it off. "Are you scared, or are you just imagining things?" one of them teased. "Just the wind," I replied, but unease gnawed at me. The next day the shadow returned. This time I was outside, watering my plants. I turned to see a figure standing at the edge of my yard, their outline blurred and indistinct. I squinted, trying to make out their features, but they were gone before I could blink. My heart raced and I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. That night I decided to dig into the history of my home. I discovered that it had once been the site of an old farmhouse, abandoned for decades. Stories of strange happenings had lingered in the area, whispers of shadows seen darting through the trees. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the history of the property. I visited the local library, combing through archives and newspapers. I learned about the family who had lived there, their lives intertwined with tragedy. As I pieced together the past, I found records of a mysterious disappearance. A young girl had gone missing in the woods near my house, her fate unknown. The unsettling thought of her spirit lingering in the shadows chilled me to the bone. Days turned into weeks, and the shadow continued to appear. Each sighting sent a wave of fear through me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to confront it. I bought candles and set them up outside, hoping to illuminate the darkness. That night, I sat on my porch, candlelight flickering as I waited. The air grew heavy, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond the edge of the yard. Suddenly, the shadow materialized before me. It loomed, indistinct and cold, drawing closer. My heart raced as I realized I was face to face with something that felt both familiar and terrifying. As the candlelight flickered, the shadow shifted, revealing glimpses of a face, an anguished expression that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment I understood, the spirit of the girl who had gone missing had been trying to communicate. Fear gave way to compassion as I recognized her sorrow. "What do you want?" I whispered, tears brimming in my eyes. The shadow lingered, then slowly faded into the night, leaving me with a heavy heart. The following nights were different. The shadow returned, but this time it felt less menacing. I felt an unspoken connection, as if we had formed a bond through our shared sorrow. I began lighting candles regularly, hoping to guide her spirit. With each flicker I sensed her presence growing stronger. Over time I learned to appreciate the beauty of shadows, understanding that they could hold stories of their own. The fear I once felt transformed into a gentle respect for the unknown. Eventually I discovered more about the girl's life, uncovering her dreams and aspirations. I felt compelled to honor her memory, sharing her story with others. The shadows became a reminder of her presence, a haunting yet beautiful connection. I often found myself looking out the window, waiting for the flicker of movement, a reassurance that she was still with me. Through my journey I realized that shadows are not always to be feared. Sometimes they carry the weight of stories waiting to be told. And in understanding that, I found solace in the presence of the unseen. It was the fall of 2018, and the air was crisp with the promise of Halloween. I was in middle school, teetering on the edge of childhood and adolescence, and my friends and I were buzzing with excitement. This Halloween felt special. It would likely be our last year trick-or-treating. The thought was bittersweet. We had spent countless nights dreaming up costumes and planning our candy haul, but now, as we approached our teenage years, we could feel the inevitable pull of adulthood looming closer. Our school had a half day, which meant more time for mischief. The plan was to meet at my house at 5 o'clock, just as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. I could hardly contain my excitement as I checked my watch repeatedly, counting down the minutes until I would see my friends, Ethan and Mia. We had agreed on a low-effort costume, black clothes and random masks we'd scavenged from the local dollar store. They were far from extravagant, but they would suffice. The thrill of Halloween was in the air, and that was all that mattered. As soon as they arrived, we wasted no time. We sprinted out of my front door, our laughter echoing down the street, our hearts racing with a mixture of adrenaline and sugar-induced anticipation. Our goal was the ritzy side of the neighborhood, where custom houses stood apart from the rest. We all believed the rich folks would be generous, handing out full-sized candy bars instead of the tiny ones we usually received. We stopped at most houses along the way, the excitement building with each doorbell ring and each piece of candy dropped into our bags. The thrill of anticipation was palpable and we felt invincible, the night still young and full of possibilities. But as we ventured further from my home, darkness began to creep in and the streetlights flickered to life, casting a ghostly glow on our path. After nearly 2 hours of hopping from house to house, we finally reached the grand homes on the far side of the neighborhood. The architecture was impressive, but the distance between each house became apparent as we moved from one door to another. We began jogging to make up for lost time, laughter turning into hurried breaths. Just past 9 o'clock, the sidewalks had emptied and the air thickened with an unsettling silence. As we approached the last house on the block, a sense of urgency washed over us. We agreed it was time to head back, candy in hand, ready for a night of movies and gorging on sweets. But just as we began our walk home, we noticed a figure approaching in the darkness. A man clad in a hooded sweatshirt, his face obscured. He walked with an unusual calmness, an adult wandering the streets on a night meant for children. A shiver danced down my spine. We instinctively moved to the other side of the street, an unspoken agreement to avoid any potential confrontation. As we passed him, I felt his gaze on us, piercing and unwavering. My heart raced as I glanced over my shoulder, the man watching us as we hurried past. We quickened our pace, the distance between us slowly widening, but a sense of dread gnawed at my insides. Something felt wrong. After a few minutes I thought we had escaped the stranger, but then just ahead of us my friend Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. I bumped into him, nearly losing my balance. "What's wrong?" I whispered, my heart pounding louder than ever. He pointed, his voice barely a breath. "Look!" Standing among the trees bordering one of the houses was the same hooded figure, hidden just beyond the reach of the streetlights. My blood ran cold as I processed what I was seeing. He had been following us. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Fear swept over us as we exchanged panicked glances. "What do we do?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "We have to keep moving," I said, forcing myself to sound braver than I felt. There was only one way out, the way we had come. We stepped forward slowly, trying to keep our distance from the figure that seemed to watch us from the shadows. As we approached the edge of the trees, the man stepped into the dim light. He walked toward us with an unnatural calmness, as if he had all the time in the world. In that moment, we made a split-second decision to run. Adrenaline coursed through my veins and we dashed into the woods, our only option. Branches whipped against our arms and legs as we plunged deeper into the darkness, disoriented and desperate. The woods were thick and the ground was uneven, but we pushed on, fear propelling us forward. After a minute or so, we paused, panting heavily, listening for any sign that the man had followed us. The silence was deafening. We huddled against a tree, trying to catch our breath. The weight of the night pressed down on us, and we strained our ears, listening for the sound of footsteps or rustling leaves. Just when we began to think we might have lost him, we heard it, a faint crunch of leaves nearby. We froze, holding our breath as the sound grew closer. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, creeping through the underbrush. Fear washed over me again as I realized we were vulnerable, completely exposed. I felt the urge to scream but swallowed it down, hoping the figure wouldn't find us. "Did he see us?" Ethan whispered, eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I breathed, feeling a lump form in my throat. We waited, hearts pounding in our chests as the footsteps continued to move around us, fading in and out of earshot. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the sound stopped. We exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to remain hidden or make a run for it. We needed to get back to safety. "Let's go," I whispered, breaking the silence. We turned back toward the direction we came from, moving slowly, cautiously. But as we stepped back into the open air, a chill crept down my spine. The man stood at the edge of the trees, silhouetted against the moonlight, watching us. Our eyes locked, and I could see the glint of something sharp in his hand. Panic surged through me, and we took off again, running as fast as we could, the path ahead shrouded in darkness. By some miracle, we broke free from the woods and stumbled back onto the sidewalk, gasping for breath. The street was empty, the only sounds our ragged breathing and the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. We didn't stop until we reached my house, collapsing against the front door, too scared to even look back. We waited in silence for what felt like hours, but no one came. The night passed slowly, our hearts still racing from the encounter. We didn't dare call the police. We were terrified of being labeled as overreacting kids. We simply sat there, the weight of the night hanging over us. After that Halloween, we didn't go out again. We spent the night watching movies, though no film could distract us from the chilling memory of what we had experienced. To this day, I still feel a sense of dread at the thought of that man in the shadows, and I can't shake the feeling that he was waiting for us, watching us, hoping we would wander too far into the darkness.